I've been living in Australia for over a year and a half now, and for a long time I didn't want to make this video because I wasn't sure how honest I could be. I still love it here, genuinely, but it's a bit complicated, and I think a lot of people would expect this video to be the highlight reel, the Instagram version, where everything is perfect and there's no problems at all whatsoever. But I don't think that's the one that you're actually looking for. You want to know what it's really like, the pros and the cons. So what I'm going to give you in this video is the completely honest answer to the question that I get asked more than anything else. Was it worth it? So let's get into it. So number one, the admin reality. When you watch YouTube videos like this, it's very easy to just get caught up in all the optimism and beauty and excitement of your potentially new life, your fresh start. I'm gonna go to the beach every single morning. I'm gonna start running. I'm gonna go to that cafe and get all that lovely cheap coffee. But before you see a single beach, you might have an absolute mountain of paperwork. I know I did. So the visa process is a very personal thing. And as I'm not a migration agent and I don't work for the Australian government, I couldn't advise you on how to get a visa and what the best one for you would be. But say you do what a lot of under 35-year-old Brits do, they apply for the working holiday visa. And while I've heard that the application process for this isn't too arduous, it's actually quite streamlined, and you pay that small fee and then hopefully you get an email sent back to you saying your visa's been granted. Once you've done that though, you then have to apply for Medicare. You then need to get your tax file number so you can legally work in Australia and get paid. Maybe depending if your visa allows it, you need to get an ABN, an Australian business number, so you can create your business in Australia. And then of course there's also getting a bank account here. A lot of them require you to have a utility bill with your name and Australian address on it, so that means you then need to go rent an apartment or a house. So there's all these different things. It can feel quite overwhelming at times, and that sadly is the actual friction of setting up a new life in any country. I had to do this in Japan before when I was hired for a 13-month acting contract in the country by a very large company. I was so excited, and even though I had a company helping me out and processing the paperwork for me, I still had to fill out so many forms. I couldn't even, draw outside the lined boxes, otherwise it would have failed the application. So yes, it's a bit annoying, but it's completely survivable, and honestly, it's completely worth it. It's like delayed gratification. Your mum says to you, you have to do your mathematics homework before you get your pudding for the evening, that lovely bowl of jelly and ice cream. So the point I'm trying to make here is that moving to Australia sounds very romantic. You start thinking of this fresh start like you're some sort of Hollywood character in your own main movie, which you are. You are a main character in your movie and you should be excited. But then when you're on the phone to the ATO for 45 minutes, it kind of takes a little bit of that romanticism out of it. But you'll be glad to know there is one thing that doesn't require any admin, and that's hitting that little like button right below this video. Bit cheeky, shameless plug. Section number 2, the cost of living. Is it expensive here or is it cheaper? Well, to start this off on a positive note, I once paid over $5 Australian for a bunch of bananas once. Bunch of bananas. Now, if any Aussies are watching this, that might sound like a ridiculous statement, but in the UK you can buy a bunch of bananas for under $2 Australian. While a lot of our fruit and veg is imported to the UK, it's very, very cheap. So let's talk about rent. Even living quite close to the city centre of Brisbane, for about the same amount of rent that I was paying in a mould-ridden, freezing, not a very nice, tiny one-bed flat shared with my Aussie wife back in London, we get a way bigger place here. We get our own garage we can store our car in. We get a little back garden. We did not have an outdoor space, not even a balcony in this place in London that was extortionate in comparison. Not to mention, we also had to pay our council tax while renting in London. That is called rates here in Australia. And if you're renting in Queensland, you don't have to pay it, which saves you a huge amount of money. Our previous apartment in Australia was privately rented, and the landlords were very kind enough not to charge us for our water, so we only had to pay gas, electric and broadband, which was lovely. And even with that previous place, it was actually the cheapest place I've ever rented in the world, and it was much bigger than any places I've stayed in the UK. So I would argue that while there is a housing crisis in Australia, it is still cheaper to rent than my experience of living in some major cities in the UK. One thing I love that is way cheaper though is the gorgeous coffee and eating out in beautiful brunch culture. Brunch culture is a pretty nationwide thing in Australia. Aussies love a brunch, and there's lots of outdoor seating in Brisbane specifically, gorgeous plates of food and gorgeous coffee. The coffee is the best in the world here. I say that with full conviction, even after traveling through Italy and France and Japan. Some parts of the world that people argue the coffee's even better. In my opinion, it's not. And going for a coffee and getting an acai bowl or some gorgeous avocado on toast with a couple of poached eggs, it's half the price of purchasing the exact same meal in the UK, and that's most places I visited in the UK. I grew up in Cheltenham, which is a lovely little Cotswolds town. It's not that expensive, it's not like London by any means, but you will pay a lot more in the UK for eating out compared to Australia. But then on the other hand, grocery shopping, going to a budget supermarket like Aldi, don't worry, we do have Aldi in Australia. It is still double the cost of my groceries I was spending back in the UK. So however, a bit of a pro of the groceries being more expensive in Australia is that a lot of the fresh produce is grown in the country. So, you know, sometimes it's better quality than what you would get in a UK supermarket. But you adjust to the prices eventually, and I would say that the Australian dollar is a really good currency. For £1 British pound, you get about £2 Australian at the time of filming this video. But I found that with retail, like when I've had to buy a new camera for this YouTube channel, I've saved a couple of £100 buying it in Australia compared to if I went to the DJI store back in the UK. Now, something I need to mention is the loneliness that nobody posts about. Of course, no one posts about this. Travel influencers, they don't get sponsored if they're posting about being miserable, sitting in their gorgeous Australian flat all alone because they got no friends. Sounds a bit harsh actually, but making friends here is a lot more difficult than people realise. It's very easy to have casual conversation with Aussies. I mean, when I met my Australian wife on this acting job in Japan, she was one of the easiest people to talk to and we connected immediately. But then when I've been, you know, meeting other guys in Australia, having a chat and stuff, it's all well and good, but actually continuing that conversation further than just sitting in the elevator or waiting at the bar counter in the pub, it's quite difficult. And it's a real consideration if you're moving here. Are you willing to really invest into building these relationships? Because it's not as easy as when you were back at school. And I wouldn't say this is something specific to Australia and Australians. I would say it's just more of a problem being an adult. One thing that can hit you quite hard is those Sunday afternoons, you know, you've got work the next day, maybe your mum and dad back in the UK or Canada or India or South Korea, wherever you're from, they're not awake yet. So you're kind of just sitting in your apartment on your own. Maybe you go to a cafe, maybe you go to the beach, but you're still on your own. And so until you make those friends that you can hang out with, the loneliness kind of increases the homesickness 10 times. It can be really difficult. Now, this probably sounds a bit strange, but in your home country right now, and if you're planning to move to Australia, go practice spending time on your own. So next time you want to go out for a coffee, go on your own, practice eating out on your own, practice going to like a park on your own and exercising on your own. I'm not saying, you know, get rid of your friends. I'm saying practice being independent, because if you can build up that resilience, it's going to make you move to Australia much easier. Of course, you could move here. You could be the most charismatic, likable person on the earth. I don't know. And you could find that you've got 20 best mates before the end of the week. Great. But it's just a consideration. Now, if any of this is helpful so far and you want to go a bit deeper, I actually have full-length, fully edited videos out on my Patreon that have never been posted to YouTube before, like how I was wrong about the UK, which if you've been watching this channel before, you know is a very big admission. So I'll leave the QR code right there. Don't know where I was going. And it's also in the link in the description below. Next section, the weather versus the hype. I must say I am guilty of being one of those content creators who overhypes the weather in Australia. I apologize. The weather specifically in Brisbane is drop dead gorgeous. It's gorgeous, darling. But the endless summer theory is a bit of a lie. Brisbane gets some real rainy seasons, and when it does rain, it absolutely tips it down. I've seen a Brit who moved to Australia on Instagram who talks about how in the UK we get light, tiny little raindrops. It's just little drizzle generally. But in Australia, the drops are thick. You know, one raindrop hits you and it feels like your entire shoulder's wet. But in Brisbane specifically, the humidity is quite brutal. Some people think dry heat is worse. That's a bit of a debate online, but humidity is really hard, especially if you come from quite a mild country like the UK. You'll want to start investing in really lightweight, breathable material. Uniqlo does some good stuff. I have bought a lot of linen products because they're so light and airy, and they're essential to survive the summer here. And then you go to Melbourne and you really do get 4 seasons in one day. It's not a cliche. It can be absolutely sweltering in the morning, and then by the evening you've got a thunderstorm and it's really chilly. It's very strange. And not to mention, in Queensland there can be potential cyclones. We were hit with Cyclone Alfred last year, I think it was, which was very scary. And also Queensland suffers from a lot of flash flooding. So that's also a consideration. Have a look at the local floodplain maps. You can do that by Googling your local area and put in like flood map when renting or buying a place in Australia, because otherwise you could be like, oh, the rent is really cheap on this place. Great, I'll sign the lease. And then you realize it's in like the worst flooding zone of the entire country. But I must admit, having, I would say about 80% of the year, gorgeous sunshine, and it be warm rather than cold really helps with general mental health. In my experience, as someone who has suffered from a bit of anxiety and depression in my past living in the UK, it's made the mental health journey a bit easier. I find that I'm more productive, and I find that I'm all around more cheerful about life, which kind of ripples into other areas like my marriage, into being better with my money, unless I'm at a cafe. Yes, I will have a third coffee, Dave. And quick one, apparently over 87% of people who regularly watch these videos aren't yet subscribed. So if you don't fancy being part of that statistic, you can hit that little subscribe button if you want to. I won't force you, but if you fancy it. Let's move on to the next section, work culture. Now this genuinely surprised me. Australians work hard. They've got a really solid work ethic, but work-life balance is really promoted here, and I really respect that. Of course, there will be some companies and some people in Australia who will work you to the bone. They won't be nice bosses, and they are enforcing really horrible, potentially illegal work ethics onto you. That's not okay. The majority though, and having relatives here since marrying an Aussie, I've seen that the work-life balance is so much nicer. Employers don't expect you to stay late all the time. They don't judge you or guilt trip you or make you feel bad if you need to take a day off because you're unwell. In fact, they encourage it. They understand that it's more productive to rest and recuperate so you're stronger the next day or two and you don't get everyone else in the office sick. But not only that, but midweek in the UK, I feel like a lot of us have a very miserable routine. We commute home, then we make a cup of tea, pop the TV on, and we just stay indoors all day. And yes, sometimes the weather isn't very good in the UK, I must admit, but still it's no excuse for you not getting outside, getting some exercise and enjoying how beautiful the UK really is. I don't say that enough on this channel. The UK is gorgeous. Like in this video from the Patreon video I was talking about earlier, when I was in Cornwall, going for a run across these breathtaking views. Oh my word. One of the many reasons why I was wrong about the UK since moving here. But I found that in the UK, and I've worked a few 9-to-5 jobs as a struggling actor, you know, to pay the rent when the acting jobs weren't coming in. They would encourage working you to the bone. They would encourage overtime and getting in early before your shift has even started, even though they're paying you by the hour, which always was a bit sketchy to me. And I would say that because of some toxic work cultures in the UK, made me see 9-to-5 jobs in a really dim light. And I take that on board, that is how I interpreted my life experience. But because of that, it made me double down so much on building my own businesses and having my own freedom of my schedule. And that's why acting and freelancing and content creation is so important to me. There is a reason why people come here and never leave. I love receiving comments from you when you say, yeah, I used to live in the UK, I used to live in South Korea, I used to live in India and America, and I moved to Australia and I never left because it's such a beautiful country with beautiful people. And honestly, I couldn't agree more. The amount of space this country has, the gorgeous nature, seeing quite literally rainbow-coloured birds, rainbow lorikeets, flying past me when I'm working at my desk. It's so cool. I feel like I'm in Disneyland, but it's real life. Probably not the best analogy. The pace of life. When I go out for a run in bushland and seeing all the families with their kids and walking their dogs and maybe going on bike rides and People are friendly to each other. People say hello to you. Even in Brisbane as a city, I find that more city lifestyle in the UK, people aren't as friendly. Whereas in countryside towns like Cheltenham, people do say good morning to you, of course. And before falling in love with Maddie, I would have never have considered moving to Australia. I never even thought of coming for a holiday here. I thought, oh, that place is miles away. I mean, it can't be as good as everyone says it is. I think I'll just stay in the UK. And that's because I had this fixed mindset. I had this probably slightly cowardly mindset of not wanting to leave the UK, of not wanting to, build a new life somewhere that has made me happier. I'm kicking myself now. It's taught me that there's so much good in the world and that Australians will jump to help you when you're in need. I don't see much of the bystander effect that you witness in London. Someone falls to the ground because they're unwell and they clearly need medical attention, and some Londoners will just walk over you. They'll be like, oh, he's in the way. It's unbelievable. But in Australia, even in Sydney, if you're in need, people jump to help you. Oh, that's what life's about. That's what a community should be about, no matter how big the country is. And I'm sure you already know, Australia is bloody massive. So after all of that, the honest question, my final verdict, the moment you've been waiting for, would I do it again? Yes. End of video. No, I'm just joking. Yes, I would 1000% do this again. It has been the best experience of my life. And I say this as a foreigner who never expected to live in such an exotic country. That's how I see it. And I've absolutely fallen in love with it. Yes, it has its downsides. Yes, there are problems here. No country is perfect. And I couldn't honestly say to you it's a perfect country, it's paradise. I don't believe anywhere on earth like that exists. But just because I adore Australia doesn't mean that the UK is a bad place to live. In fact, I'm going through a stage of quite tough homesickness. I really miss my family back in the UK. Look, despite Australia being a 24-hour flight from the UK, despite some things being quite expensive here, it's just worth it. It's worth the cost of those downsides. It's worth the costs of the negatives, in my opinion. So is it right for you? I don't know. You kind of have to make your own mind up about it. And I would say that if you're thinking about moving here, right, just come for a holiday. You can come for up to 90 days and have a lovely holiday, travel a few of the different parts of Australia, and you can see if you have a good time. And if you love it that much, you can then think about maybe applying for, a longer move and to actually be able to work here and live here like a local. So yeah, I'm really excited for you if that is something you're interested in. But if you enjoyed this video, don't click away yet. Go watch this video here, all about the 22 things that no one will tell you before you move to Australia. If you're thinking about it, I would highly recommend that video, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join this lovely community. Thanks for watching to the end, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.